trash that learned the right fork. That was the toast my father-in-law gave me in front of 200 of Linden Harbor's wealthiest donors. Conrad Halberg thought public humiliation would break me. He was wrong. I didn't leave the table in tears. I went back to work. 18 months later, when I acquired his debt and fired him from his own board, I realized he was right about one thing. I definitely know how to use a knife. The rain in Linden Harbor always smelled like old money. It was a specific scent, a mix of wet slate, manicured hydrangeas, and the exhaust of cars that cost more than my father made in a decade. I watched the droplets streak against the tinted window of the town car, distorting the lights of the Halberg Foundation's annual gala into long, bleeding streaks of gold. Ethan reached across the leather console and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, but his grip was clammy. He promised he would behave this time, Ethan said, his voice tight. I did not pull my hand away, but I did not squeeze back. We had played this scene 4 times in 4 years. The script never changed, only the venue. First it was the engagement party, then the wedding rehearsal, then the christening of a yacht I was not allowed to board, and now this, the annual donors' dinner. The night Conrad Halberg reminded the city that he owned it. I smoothed the fabric of my navy gown. It was simple, structured, and unadorned. I had paid for it myself. That was important to me. In the Halberg orbit, gifts came with strings that eventually turned into nooses. I hope you are right, I said. I really do. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked so much like his father in the shadows. The same square jaw, the same heavy brow, but he lacked Conrad's predatory stillness. Ethan was always moving, always adjusting, always apologizing for space he had not yet occupied. He is stressed, Ethan said. The market is volatile. The deal with the logistics subsidiary is taking longer than he wants. He is just venting. I turned to look at my husband. He is not venting. Ethan, he is hunting. We pulled up to the curb. Valets in white jackets swarmed the car before the wheels stopped rolling. I stepped out into the cool October air, the flashbulbs popping in a rhythmic, blinding stutter. I fixed a smile on my face. It was my armor. I was Julia Bryant, Chief Operating Officer of a mid-sized logistics firm, a woman who managed supply chains and navigated unions. I was not just Mrs. Ethan Halberg, but as we walked up the marble steps, I felt the familiar weight of the Halberg name pressing down on my shoulders. Inside, the ballroom was a cavern of crystal and velvet. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that required mink, which half the women in the room were wearing. Conrad Halberg was holding court near the ice sculpture. He looked timeless, in the way sharks look timeless. He was 68 years old, tanned from a week in St. Bart's, and wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. When he saw us, his eyes did not go to his son. They went to me. He smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who found a loose thread and was dying to pull it. "Julia," Conrad said, his voice booming enough to turn heads. "You made it. I was worried you might get lost. The service entrance is tricky to find if you are not used to using the front door." Ethan laughed nervously. "Good one, Dad." I kept my spine straight. "Good evening, Conrad." The directions were quite clear. He stepped closer, invading my personal space just enough to be aggressive, but not enough to be called out on it. He held a tumbler of scotch in one hand, the amber liquid swirling as he gestured to the room. "Look at this," he said. 300 of the finest minds in the state. Do you ever wonder how you ended up here, Julia? It is quite the lottery win." From a factory floor to the Halberg table, my father was a foreman. "Conrad," I said, my voice steady, not a factory worker, "and I run an operations department. I do not think luck had much to do with it." Conrad chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Operations, right. You move boxes. It is adorable. You know, I was looking at the bond yields this morning. The 10-year Treasury is down to 2%. It makes it very hard for us to generate the returns the foundation needs without taking risks. But I suppose bond yields are a bit abstract for someone who deals in cardboard. I paused. He was trying to bait me with condescension. But he was sloppy. Actually, Conrad, I said, keeping my tone light, almost conversational. The 10-year Treasury closed at 2.4% today. It ticked up after the Federal Reserve announcement at noon. If you are calculating your returns based on 2%, your models are off by nearly 20%. The air between us went still. Ethan froze. A few people nearby, who had been eavesdropping under the guise of sipping champagne, stopped pretending. Conrad stared at me. The amusement in his eyes flickered out, replaced by something cold and flat. He did not like being corrected. He especially did not like being corrected by a woman he considered a charity case. Then, slowly, the smile returned. But this time, it was sharper. 2.4, he said softly. Well, look at you. You can read a ticker. He patted my cheek. It was a light tap, patronizing and possessive. Very good. Julia, he said, it is good to know you are paying attention. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of admirers. Ethan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 minutes. That went okay. Ethan said, he is in a good mood. I looked at the spot where Conrad had stood. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. No, Ethan, that did not go okay. We took our seats at the head table an hour later. The dinner was an elaborate affair involving 5 courses and wine that cost more than my first car. I sat between Ethan and a senator who spent the entire meal looking over my shoulder, hoping to spot someone more important. Conrad sat at the center, flanked by his board members. I watched him. He was charming, gregarious, playing the role of the benevolent patriarch perfectly. But every few minutes, his eyes would flick to me. He waited until the dessert was served, a tower of spun sugar and gold leaf, before he stood up. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The room fell silent instantly. The power Conrad wielded was not just financial, it was gravitational. When he moved, the room moved with him. Thank you all for coming. Conrad began. His voice was warm, projected without a microphone. We have raised $4 million tonight for the arts. That is a legacy we can all be proud of. Applause rippled through the room. He let it wash over him before raising a hand. Legacy is an interesting thing, he continued. It is about blood. It is about breeding. It is about knowing who you are and where you come from. I saw Marla Kessick, the chief financial officer of Halberg Holdings, shift in her seat 2 tables away. She was a sharp woman with eyes like flint. But right now, she looked down at her plate. She looked nervous. My son, Ethan, Conrad said, gesturing to us. Ethan chose to expand our legacy in a unique way. He brought us Julia. The spotlight swung to me. I did not blink. I kept a polite, frozen smile on my face. Julia was just telling me earlier about bond yields. Conrad said, chuckling. Can you imagine? She was correcting me on the Federal Reserve rates. It is truly remarkable what people can memorize when they are desperate to fit in. A few nervous titters ran through the crowd. Ethan stiffened beside me. But you know, Conrad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried to the back of the room. You can put a diamond collar on a dog, but it still barks at the mailman. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Conrad raised his glass, looking directly at me. To Julia, he said, trash that learned the right fork. He drank. For 3 seconds. No one moved. The insult hung in the air, heavy and toxic. It was not a joke. It was not a tease. It was a public execution. I felt the blood drain from my face. But I did not look down. I did not cry. I forced myself to look at Conrad, then at the room. I saw the faces of the donors, shocked. Yes, but some were suppressing smiles. They were relieved it was not them. I saw the business partners, men who had shaken my hand an hour ago, now studying the tablecloths. And I saw Ethan. My husband sat frozen, his mouth slightly open. He looked at his father. then at me, then back at his father. He was waiting. He was waiting for Conrad to laugh, to signal that it was okay. Say something. I willed him silently. Stand up. Walk out. Flip the table. Do something. Ethan did nothing. He picked up his water glass and took a sip, his hand trembling. The moment broke. Conrad laughed, a loud, booming sound that gave everyone permission to breathe. I am kidding, Conrad roared. Oh, you people have no sense of humor. Julia knows I adore her. Look at her. She is tough. She can take it. The room exhaled. People laughed, relieved. The tension dissipated, replaced by the clatter of silverware and the hum of conversation. But the words were still there. They were branded into the air. Trash that learned the right fork. I sat there for the remaining 40 minutes of the dinner. I ate 2 bites of the dessert. I nodded when the senator spoke to me. I was a statue of composure. But inside, I was not crying. I was cataloging. I looked at Marla Kessick again. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't looking at Conrad with admiration. She was looking at him with something that looked like terror. Why was the CFO terrified of a man who just proved he was the king of the jungle? I looked at the board members. 2 of them looked uncomfortable. 1 looked delighted. I looked at Ethan, and in that moment, the love I had held for him, the patience I had nursed for 4 years, began to curdle. When the dinner finally ended, we walked to the car in silence. Ethan tried to take my hand again. I moved it to my lap. He did not mean it, Ethan whispered as the driver pulled onto the highway. You know how he is when he drinks scotch. I stared out the window at the passing darkness. He meant every word. Ethan, and you let him. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm. The master bedroom of our penthouse was filled with gray light. Ethan was still asleep, his breathing heavy and rhythmic. I looked at him and felt a profound sense of distance, as if I were watching a stranger on a train. I showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, and drove myself to work. My firm, Sterling Logistics, was located in the industrial park south of the city. It was a world away from the manicured lawns of the Hallberg estate. Here, there were loading docks, forklifts, and the smell of diesel. I walked into the office with my head high. I greeted the receptionist. I held the elevator for a junior analyst. I sat at my desk and opened the quarterly projection spreadsheets. I worked for 3 hours without a break. I optimized a shipping route for a client in the Midwest, saving them 12% on fuel costs. I negotiated a supplier dispute for our packaging division. I was efficient. I was sharp. I was everything Conrad said I wasn't. Around 11 o'clock, I walked to the break room to get coffee. The door was slightly ajar. I heard voices. Did you hear about the Hallberg dinner? A voice said. It was Sarah, one of the marketing coordinators. No. What happened? Asked another voice. My cousin was catering. She said the old man stood up and called his daughter-in-law trash. Literally used the word trash. In front of everyone? No way. I swear. And get this. Her husband didn't do anything. He just sat there. God. Can you imagine? I would have died. She must have zero self-respect to stay with a family like that. I stood frozen by the door. The coffee in my mug grew cold. The insult had legs. It had walked out of the ballroom and into the real world. It was not just a humiliation. It was a reputation. I was the woman who let herself be called trash. I turned around and walked back to my office, my heels clicking rhythmically on the linoleum. I closed the door and sat in the silence. I reached for my coat, which I had hung on the back of my chair. To get my phone, my hand brushed against something papery in the pocket. I frowned. I hadn't put anything in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a piece of heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind used for thank you notes. I unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost architectural. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Nolan Greer, Conrad's executive assistant for the last 30 years. Nolan was a ghost of a man, always present, never speaking, carrying Conrad's secrets in a leather briefcase. There were only 2 words written in the center of the card. He's exposed. No signature, no explanation. I stared at the words. Exposed? Conrad Halberg was the most insulated man in the state. He was surrounded by lawyers, fixers, and money. What was he exposed to? I put the note in my shredder. I watched the paper turn into confetti. Nolan would not have taken a risk like that unless the cracks were deep. I went home early. I needed to think. When I unlocked the penthouse door, I found the foyer filled with flowers, roses, hundreds of them, white, pink, red. The scent was suffocating. Ethan came out of the living room, holding a small velvet box. He looked like a puppy who had chewed the sofa and hoped a wagging tail would fix it. "I am so sorry. Jules," he said, "I talked to him this morning. I told him he crossed a line. You told him," I repeated, putting my keys in the bowl. "Or you listened to him." "He apologized," Ethan said, rushing forward. "Look, he wants you to have this." He opened the box. Inside was a diamond tennis bracelet. It was thick, heavy, and probably cost more than my parents' house. I looked at the diamonds. They glittered coldly under the hallway lights. "He thinks he can buy my dignity." I said, "He just wants to make peace." Ethan pleaded, "He respects you, Julia. In his own way. He is just complicated. Please, put it on. For me." I looked at my husband. I looked at the fear in his eyes. It was not fear of losing me. It was fear of conflict. He wanted me to take the bracelet so the tension would go away, so he could go back to being the comfortable son of a billionaire. I took the box from his hand. I snapped it shut. "I do not want his jewelry." "Ethan, I want a husband. I am your husband," he protested. I stepped closer to him. My voice was quiet, deadly calm. "Last night, a man called me trash in a room full of people, and you drank water. So I have a question for you, and I need you to answer it without thinking about your trust fund." Ethan swallowed hard. "Are you married to me?" I asked. "Or are you married to his approval?" Ethan opened his mouth. He looked at me, really looked at me, and then he flinched. His eyes darted away toward the window, toward the floor. He could not say the words. That is what I thought. I said, I walked past him, dropped the velvet box on the entry table, and went into the study. I locked the door. I did not pack a bag. I did not call a divorce lawyer. Leaving now would look like defeat. It would prove Conrad right, that I was weak, that I didn't belong. If I left, I was the trash that got taken out. If I stayed, I had to be something else. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the browser. I did not search for apartments. I searched for Halberg Industrial Logistics. Chill. It was the unsexy engine room of the Halberg Empire. While the foundation threw galas and the real estate division built glass towers, HL moved freight. It owned warehouses, trucks, and shipping contracts. It was the subsidiary everyone ignored because it was boring. But boring is where the money is, and boring is where the secrets are. I started digging. I pulled public filings, Department of Transportation safety records, and UCC financing statements. I worked through the night. On the surface, HIL looked like a fortress. Revenue was steady. But as I drilled down, I saw strange patterns. The maintenance budget had flatlined 3 years ago, yet the fleet size had increased. That was impossible physically. Trucks break down. If you do not spend money fixing them, you are cannibalizing the asset. Why would Conrad starve his cash cow? I needed to see it on the ground. 2 days later, I skipped a scheduled dinner with Ethan's friends. Instead, I drove my sedan to a community center in the gritty industrial district of South Linden. There was a town hall meeting for the local transport union. I did not dress like a Halberg. I wore jeans and a nondescript jacket. I sat in the back row. The room was filled with men and women in work boots. The air smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. They are cutting the shifts again. A man in the front row was saying, he looked tired. I have been driving for HIL for 15 years. They used to pay overtime if you sneezed. Now, they are docking us for bathroom breaks. And the trucks. My brakes felt soft last week. I told the depot manager, and he told me to drive it or go home. We are hearing rumors about the pension fund. A woman added, she was holding a clipboard. The reps say it is fully funded, but they keep reclassifying the contributions. Why reclassify if the money is there? I sat in the back, listening. These were not numbers on a spreadsheet. These were people. They were talking about safety, about retirement, about feeding their families. Conrad wasn't just insulting me, he was stripping this company for parts. I looked at the tired faces in the room. If I went after Conrad, if I tried to destroy him, the fallout would land on these people. A war between billionaires, or a billionaire and his daughter-in-law, usually ended with the workers getting crushed in the rubble. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Revenge is a messy emotion. It is hot and chaotic. I did not want revenge. I wanted a correction. I made a private vow right there. Sitting on a folding metal chair, I would not leak stories to the press. I would not throw wine in Conrad's face. I would not be the hysterical woman he wanted me to be. I would simply take the toy away from the child who was breaking it. I would buy the truth. I would use the very skills Conrad mocked, my operations experience, my ability to read the fine print, my knowledge of how things actually work, to dismantle his grip on the company, but I had a rule: no collateral damage. The drivers, the warehouse workers, the people who actually built the wealth Conrad spent, they had to be protected. I stood up and slipped out of the back of the hall before the meeting ended. The night air was crisp. I walked to my car, my mind already building a flowchart. Conrad Halberg thought I was trash. He thought I was a mistake. I unlocked my car door and looked back at the city skyline, where the Halberg Tower glowed like a middle finger to the stars. He was about to learn that trash is the only thing that cannot be thrown away, because it has already survived the fall. I started the engine. The game had changed. I wasn't fighting for acceptance anymore. I was fighting for control. Doctor. Helen Sloan drank her tea the way she dismantled case studies, with terrifying precision. We were sitting in the faculty lounge of the business school where she had taught me 10 years ago. A room that smelled of furniture polish and ambition. Outside, the autumn leaves were turning the campus into a firestorm of orange and red. But inside, everything was cool, gray, and intellectual. I had not seen Helen in 3 years. She had left academia to consult for institutional investors. The kind of people who moved markets with a whisper. She wore a tweed blazer that probably cost more than my first car, but her eyes were the same, piercing, impatient, and devoid of pity. So, Helen said, setting her cup down, you want to know about hostile takeovers, but you do not want to tell me who you are planning to kill. I stirred my coffee, careful not to let the spoon clink against the porcelain. I am not planning to kill anyone. Helen. I am just interested in the mechanics of leverage. Theoretically. Helen smiled. It was a dry, thin expression. Julia, you were the best operations student I had in a decade because you never cared about theory. You cared about friction. You wanted to know where the machine stuck so you could grease it or break it. If you are asking about leverage, it is because you are already in a fight. I looked at her. I decided to trust her, at least partially. Let us say there is a holding company. I said carefully, it is over-leveraged. It is propped up by reputation and cheap debt. And there is a subsidiary, a good asset, that is being mismanaged to service that debt. How does one acquire the subsidiary without alerting the parent company until it is too late? Helen leaned back, tapping a manicured fingernail on the table. You are describing a carve-out, she said. But if the parent is hostile, you are describing a siege. She leaned forward, her voice dropping an octave. Listen to me. Movies make acquisitions look like poker games, bluffing, shouting, throwing chips. They are not. Acquisitions are wars with paperwork. They are won in the footnotes. You do not beat a man like, well, whoever this theoretical giant is, by walking into his office with a check. You beat him by finding the clause in his loan agreement that he forgot about. You beat him by finding the debt covenant he is about to breach. She paused, studying my face. But be careful. Julia, if you start pulling loose threads on a sweater that expensive, the person wearing it will try to strangle you with the yarn. I left the university with her warning ringing in my ears. wars with paperwork. I went back to the office and buried myself in the mundane reality of my own job. But my mind was elsewhere. I needed intelligence. And 2 days later, I got it. I was walking to my car in the parking garage when a man in a gray maintenance uniform brushed past me. He didn't look up, didn't stop, but as he passed, he dropped a folded newspaper into the open tote bag hanging from my shoulder. I didn't react. I unlocked my car, got in, and drove 3 blocks before pulling over in a grocery store lot. I opened the newspaper. Inside, tucked between the sports section and the obituaries, was a single sheet of printed paper, no header, no footer, just a summary of a meeting agenda. It was from Nolan Greer. The document outlined a proposal for a strategic partnership between Halberg Industrial Logistics and a firm called Redwood Vale Capital. I had never heard of Redwood Vale. I pulled out my phone and started searching. Their website was a masterpiece of corporate minimalism, stock photos of wind turbines and handshakes. Lots of buzzwords like synergy and value unlocking, but very little information about their leadership or past deals. I dug deeper. I used the specialized databases I had access to through my own firm. Redwood Vale wasn't a growth partner. They were a chop shop. They specialized in distressed asset optimization, in plain English. They bought companies, loaded them with debt to pay themselves massive dividends, fired half the workforce to make the balance sheet look pretty, and then sold the empty husk to the highest bidder. And Conrad was inviting them to the table. The memo mentioned an exclusive negotiation period, ending in 30 days. The terms included a massive upfront cash injection to the Halberg parent company, secured against the assets of HIL. It made no sense. HIL was profitable. Why would Conrad mortgage his best asset to a predatory firm like Redwood Vale? Unless he needed the cash. Fast. I spent the next week living a double life. By day, I was the dutiful executive at Sterling Logistics and the quiet wife of Ethan Halberg. By night, I was forensic accountant. I started tracking the flow of money at HIL using industry benchmarks. I knew what it cost to run a fleet of 300 trucks. I knew what the fuel spend should be. I knew what the tire replacement cycle looked like. The numbers I found in the public filings, and the whispers I gathered from industry contacts, didn't add up. HIL's safety budget had been slashed by 40% in the last 2 quarters. Routine maintenance on the heavy haulers had been pushed from every 10,000 miles to every 15,000. Training programs for new drivers had been cut entirely. But the executive compensation line? That had gone up. Retention bonuses. Conrad was dressing the pig. He was cutting operational costs to artificially inflate the net income, making the company look more profitable than it was, just long enough to close the deal with Redwood Vale. It was a classic pump, and if the deal went through, Redwood Vale would inherit a fleet of ticking time bombs, and they would gut the workforce to pay for the repairs. I needed to know how close the edge really was. Fate, or perhaps the smallness of the corporate world, gave me an opening. I attended the North American Supply Chain Conference in Chicago a week later. It was a massive event. Thousands of people in lanyards wandering through a convention center the size of an airport terminal. I saw Marla Kessick at the hotel bar on the second night. Conrad's CFO was sitting alone, nursing a vodka tonic. She looked exhausted. The polished armor of her power suit seemed heavy on her shoulders. I debated avoiding her, but Helen's voice came back to me. You beat him by finding the clause he forgot about. I walked up to the bar and ordered a sparkling water. Hello, Marla, I said. She jumped slightly, splashing a drop of vodka on her cuff. She looked at me, her eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing into professional caution. Julia, she said, I did not expect to see you here. I thought this was below your pay grade now. I smiled. Taking a seat 2 stools away, I gave her space. I still work for a living. Marla. Unlike some people, I do not think operations is a dirty word. She let out a short, bitter laugh. No, she said, I suppose you do not. We sat in silence for a moment. The noise of the conference, the laughter, the clinking glasses, the drone of networking swirled around us. I heard about the Redwood Vale talks, I said quietly. Marla froze. She turned her head slowly to look at me. I do not know what you are talking about, she said. That is privileged information. I swirled my water. It is a small industry. Marla, people talk. They are saying Redwood Vale is looking for a 20% return in year 1. You know HIL cannot generate that without liquidating the fleet. Marla looked down at her drink. Her hand was gripping the glass so hard her knuckles were white. It is not my deal. Julia, she whispered, I just make the numbers work. You make the numbers look like they work, I corrected her gently. But we both know deferred maintenance is just debt you haven't booked yet. Marla closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, I saw a flash of genuine fear. The lenders are watching the EBITDA coverage ratio, she said, her voice barely audible. The covenant requires us to maintain a ratio of 4-1. If it drops below that... She stopped. She realized she had said too much. If it drops below that, the debt gets called. I finished for her. And if the debt gets called, the holding company collapses. Marla finished her drink in one swallow. She slammed the glass down. I did not say that. She said, standing up. I did not say anything. She walked away fast, weaving through the crowd. I watched her go. I had the key. The EBITDA coverage ratio. That was the pressure point. Conrad was desperate for the Redwood Vale cash because without it, he was going to breach his loan covenants. He was robbing HIL to pay the mortgage on his own ego. I returned to Linden Harbor with a new clarity. I could not just watch this happen. I had to position myself to catch the pieces when they fell. But to do that, I needed money, real money, liquid money. I started cleaning house. I owned a small rental property in the suburbs. A 3-bedroom house my grandmother had left me. It was my safety net, the only thing I owned that the Halbergs didn't touch. I listed it. I sold it to a cash buyer in 3 days. I liquidated my personal portfolio, mostly conservative mutual funds, and moved the cash into a high-yield holding account. I formed an LLC. I called it Onyx Operations. It sounded boring. It sounded like a company that sold printer toner. That was the point. I spent my evenings drafting bylaws and operating agreements. I was building a vessel that could hold a weapon. Ethan noticed. He came into the study one night while I was reviewing the closing documents for the house sale. He was wearing his silk pajamas, holding a glass of wine. He looked soft, harmless, and utterly useless. You sold your grandmother's house? He asked. His voice was hurt. Why didn't you tell me? We could have bought it from you if you needed cash. I did not need cash. Ethan, I said, not looking up from the paperwork. I needed liquidity. What is the difference? He asked. And why are you moving money around? I saw the bank statements. I stopped writing. I put the pen down. I am restructuring. I said, restructuring what? Our life? He walked into the room. He looked at the boxes of files I had stacked in the corner. Are you leaving me? He asked. The question came out small and frightened. Is that what this is? Are you building a runaway fund? I looked at him. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, like watching a character in a movie. If I were leaving you, Ethan, I would not be doing it with $100,000 from a rental house. I would be doing it with a lawyer. Then what is this? I stood up. I walked over to him and took the wine glass from his hand. I set it on the desk. I am planning to survive you. Ethan, I said, if I have to. He stared at me. Survive me? What does that mean? It means your father is playing a dangerous game with the family business. I said, and when the music stops, I am going to make sure I have a chair, even if you do not. Ethan recoiled. He looked at me as if I had pulled a knife. The anger I expected didn't come. Instead, fear washed over his face. He didn't understand what I was doing, and that terrified him more than if I had just screamed at him. He backed out of the room. He didn't ask about the house again. The next piece of the puzzle was the workforce. I needed to know the ground truth at HIL. I arranged a meeting with the union representative I had seen at the town hall. His name was Ben Miller. We met at a diner on the edge of the city. At 6 a.m, before his shift started, Ben was a big man with hands that looked like they had been carved out of oak. He was suspicious. Why does Mrs. Halberg want to buy me coffee? He asked, not touching the mug. I am not here as Mrs. Halberg. I said, I am here as someone who knows what a manifest looks like. I pushed a folder across the table. It contained a single sheet of paper, an analysis of the pension fund obligations versus the proposed reclassification Conrad was pushing. I found this in the public disclosures. I said, they are trying to move the pension obligations from a defined benefit status to a cash balance plan. Do you know what that does? Ben looked at the paper. He squinted. It changes the payout formula, he said slowly. It freezes the accruals for your older drivers. I said, the men who have been there for 20 years. It saves the company $12 million over 5 years, and it strips the retirement security from the people who built the company. Ben looked up at me. His eyes were hard. Why are you telling me this? Because if the company gets sold to the partner they are talking to, that reclassification will be line 1 of the new contract, and you won't have the leverage to stop it. Ben leaned back. Who are they talking to? I cannot say. I said, but you need to be ready. You need to look at the fine print of your collective bargaining agreement regarding change of control. If you do not have a protection clause, you need to get one. Now. Ben studied me for a long time. You are playing a dangerous game. Lady, he said. I drank my coffee. I am not playing. Ben, I am working. He took the folder. He didn't say thank you, but he nodded. That was enough. A week later, Helen Sloan called me. I have some people you should meet, she said. The meeting was in a nondescript office building in the financial district. No marble lobby, no art on the walls, just glass, steel, and whiteboards. The firm was called Northbridge Stewardship Partners. I walked into the conference room. 3 people were sitting at the table. 2 men and a woman. They wore button-down shirts. No ties. They looked like engineers, not bankers. Helen introduced me. This is Julia Bryant. The man in the center, a guy named David who looked like he ran marathons for fun, stood up and shook my hand. Helen says you spotted the yield curve discrepancy on the Halberg bond issue before the street did. David said. I nodded. It was a simple math error, but it told me they were cutting corners in the back office. David smiled. We like simple math errors. They usually point to big cultural problems. We sat down. They didn't ask me about my husband. They didn't ask about the dinner. They asked me about logistics. They asked me how I would optimize a mixed fleet distribution network. They asked me about fuel hedging strategies. They asked me how I handled the union negotiation at my current firm last year. I answered them. I didn't pitch. I didn't sell. I just explained how I worked. After an hour, David closed his notebook. We are not a vulture fund. Julia, he said, we do not strip assets. We buy good companies that have lost their way, and we put operators in charge to fix them. We hold them for 10 years, not 2. We are boring. We like boring. I leaned forward. HIL is a good company. I said, it has good bones. It has good people. But it is being starved. The current leadership treats it like an ATM, not a business. And if you had the keys? David asked. I would restore the maintenance budget immediately. I said, I would settle the union contract to guarantee stability. I would fire the consultants and listen to the depot managers. And I would tell the customers the truth about the delivery timelines. David looked at his partners. They nodded. We have been watching Halberg Holdings. David said, we know the debt is shaky. If there is an opening, we have the capital, but we do not have the operator. We need someone who knows the family, knows the business, and, forgive me, has a reason to fight for it. I looked him in the eye. I am not doing this for revenge. David, revenge is a waste of energy. I am doing this because I hate seeing a good machine broken by bad mechanics. David smiled. That is the right answer. We left it there. No promises, just a connection. But I felt a door opening. Conrad must have sensed something. He had the instincts of an animal that knows when the weather is changing. 2 days later, he invited me to lunch. We met at the Meridian Club, a place where the waiters wore white gloves and the menu had no prices. Conrad was charming. He poured me water. He asked about my job. "You work too hard." "Julia," he said, buttering a roll, "you really do. It worries me. Ethan says you are stressed. I am not stressed." "Conrad, I am productive," he chuckled. "Always the worker bee. Look, I have been thinking, that little misunderstanding at the dinner, it was unfortunate. I want to make it right." I waited. "The foundation is opening a new wing at the Children's Hospital." He said, "We need a director of philanthropic outreach. It is a beautiful role. You would organize the galas, meet with the donors, be the face of our charity. It pays very well. 6 figures. And you would not have to deal with, well, sweaty truck drivers." I looked at him. I saw exactly what he was doing. He was offering me a gilded cage. He wanted to pay me to be a decoration. He wanted to take me out of the business world, where I was dangerous, and put me in the charity world, where I would be harmless. If I took the job, I would be on the payroll. I would be owned. It was a test. If I accepted, I was the trash he thought I was, someone who could be bought with a fancy title and an easy life. I picked up my napkin and dabbed my mouth. "It is a generous offer." "Conrad," I said. He smiled, thinking he had won. "I knew you would see reason, but I am going to decline," I said. His smile froze. "Excuse me? I am not a gala planner. Conrad, I am an operations executive. I like truck drivers. They are honest. When they say they are going to deliver something, they usually do." I stood up. "I think I will stay where I am. But thank you for the lunch." I walked out. I could feel his eyes boring into my back. He wasn't smiling anymore. He knew I wasn't just a nuisance. I was a problem. That night, I was in the study, reviewing the HIL vendor list I had scraped from a public database, when my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. I answered. "Hello?" "He is moving the deal forward." It was Nolan. His voice was a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked. He moved the board meeting up. Nolan said, "They are voting on the Redwood Vale partnership on Friday. He is bypassing the standard diligence period. He is forcing it through." I looked at the calendar. Friday was 3 days away. "If he signs that deal," Nolan said, "Redwood Vale gets a controlling interest in the event of a default. They will lock it down. You will never touch it." My heart hammered against my ribs. The timeline had collapsed. I wasn't ready. I didn't have the capital lined up perfectly. I didn't have the legal strategy finalized. But I had no choice. "Why are you telling me this, Nolan?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Because he made me write the memo cutting the retirees' health benefits to pay for the closing dinner." Nolan said. His voice cracked. "I am tired. Julia, I am just tired." The line went dead. I put the phone down. I stared at the dark window. 3 days. If I waited, Shell would be sold into slavery. The workers would be crushed. The company would be gutted, and Conrad would get his cash infusion, cementing his power and his arrogance for another decade. If I moved now, I would be attacking a fortress with half an army. But I remembered the look on Marla's face, the covenant. I remembered the look on Ben Miller's face, the pension, and I remembered the look on Conrad's face when he called me trash. I picked up my phone again. I dialed Helen Sloan. It was 11 at night. She answered on the second ring. "Sloan, it is Julia," I said. My voice was steady, colder than I felt. "Tell Northbridge to get their lawyers ready." "Is he moving?" Helen asked. "He is moving," I said. "Then we have to wait," she said. "If he signs, it is over." "No," I said. "We do not wait. We intercept." I stood up, the adrenaline flooding my system, clearing away the fear. I am not going to let him sign that deal. "Helen, I am going to make him an offer he cannot refuse, because if he does, I will burn his reputation to the ground with the matches he gave me." "Julia," Helen warned, "this is dangerous." "I know," I said. I looked at the reflection of myself in the glass. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a wife. "Then I won't wait," I said. I hung up. I walked out of the study. I walked past the bedroom where Ethan was sleeping. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. The war of paperwork was about to begin, and I had 3 days to write the weapon that would win it. My study had ceased to be a room in a penthouse. It had become a command center. The mahogany desk was buried under stacks of paper, shipping manifests, and printed screenshots from trade forums. I had pushed the expensive Persian rug into the corner to make room for a whiteboard where I mapped the arteries of Halberg Industrial Logistics. I was looking for the pulse, and what I found was an arrhythmia. Due diligence is usually boring work. It is checking boxes and verifying insurance policies, but when you are doing it in secret, at 2 a.m, hunting for the weakness in a billionaire's armor, it feels like defusing a bomb. I started with the customer base. A healthy logistics company has a diverse ecosystem of clients: retailers, manufacturers, agricultural producers. If one client leaves, the ship should not list, but HEL was listing. I traced the revenue streams from the last 4 quarters. I cross-referenced the shipping volumes with the accounts receivable data I had pieced together from industry benchmarks and the leaked scraps Nolan had provided. The pattern that emerged was terrifying: 42%. 42% of HIL's entire revenue stream came from a single client, Stonewater Retail Group. Stonewater was a massive national chain, the kind of big-box retailer that demanded military precision from its vendors. If you missed a delivery window by 15 minutes, they fined you. If you missed it by an hour, they threatened to pull the contract. I sat back in my chair, staring at the whiteboard. Conrad Halberg had allowed his company to become dependent on a single lung. If Stonewater walked away, HIL would suffocate in 90 days, and Stonewater was angry. I found the evidence on a logistics manager forum, buried in a thread about third-party carriers. A user with the handle SW Logistics Midwest, almost certainly a Stonewater regional manager, was venting. Our primary carrier is a legacy firm, big reputation, but their service levels have tanked. 3 missed shipments this week. They say it is unavoidable mechanical delays. I say they are cutting maintenance. We are reviewing the contract next month. The post was dated 3 days ago. I felt a cold chill. This was the invisible bleeding Helen Sloan had warned me about. Conrad was slashing the maintenance budget to dress up the balance sheet for the Redwood Vale deal, but the trucks were breaking down on the road. The service failures were enraging the one client HIL could not afford to lose. It was a death spiral. Conrad was selling the furniture to pay the rent. But soon, he would not have a house to put it in. I needed to move. I met with the Northbridge team the next morning. David and his partners looked fresh. Energized by the prospect of a fight, we sat in their glass-walled conference room, the city skyline gray and imposing behind them. I did not start with emotional appeals. I did not mention the trash comment. I put a single slide on the screen. The Stonewater concentration risk. Gentlemen, and Helen, I said, standing at the head of the table, you are not looking at a distressed asset. You are looking at a critical patient. I walked them through the numbers. I showed them the correlation between the maintenance budget cuts and the spike in late delivery penalties. The company is being hollowed out. I said, Conrad Halberg is trying to sell a shell to Redwood Vale. If that deal goes through, Redwood will see the Stonewater contract collapse within 6 months. They will respond by liquidating the assets to recoup their investment. 2,000 jobs will vanish. The pension fund will be raided. David leaned forward, his eyes sharp. And your proposal, he asked? We do not buy the company to dismantle it. I said firmly, we buy it to stabilize it. We go to Stonewater immediately, before the acquisition is even public, and we show them a turnaround plan. We promise them ring-fenced maintenance budgets. We promise them new leadership. We save the contract. We save the revenue. And we save the jobs. One of the other partners, a skeptical man named Marcus, crossed his arms. That sounds noble. Julia, but we are investors, not saviors. Why should we care about the jobs? I turned to him. Because trained drivers are the scarcest resource in this economy. Marcus, if you fire them, you cannot hire them back. The value of HIL is not the trucks. Anyone can buy trucks. The value is the workforce and the routes. If you protect the labor, you protect the asset. If you gut the labor, you own a parking lot full of rusting metal. The room went silent. I held his gaze. I was not speaking as a philanthropist. I was speaking as an operator. David smiled slowly. "She is right," he said to the room. "It is the efficient play." He turned back to me. "But to do this, we need an entry point. Conrad owns the equity. He controls the board. How do we get in?" I placed a second document on the table. "We do not buy the equity," I said. "We buy the debt." I explained the strategy I had been refining with Helen. Halberg Holdings had issued a series of bonds 5 years ago. They were trading on the secondary market. If Northbridge quietly acquired a blocking position in those bonds, we would become one of Conrad's major creditors, and creditors have rights that shareholders do not. Specifically, we would have the right to call for a restructuring if a covenant was breached. "And he is going to breach," I said softly. "When Stonewater gets angry enough to pause a payment, his cash flow dips. When the cash flow dips, he misses his coverage ratio, and when he misses that ratio, we step in, not as raiders, but as the new owners." David nodded. "It was aggressive, legal, and clean. Do it," he said. "Start buying the paper. But keep it quiet. If Conrad smells us, he will panic." I left the meeting feeling a strange sense of calm. I was not reacting anymore. I was driving, but when I got home, the atmosphere shattered. Ethan was in the living room. He was sitting on the edge of the sofa, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He was still wearing his suit jacket, but his tie was loosened, hanging like a noose around his neck. He had finally done it. He had confronted his father. I put my bag down and walked over to him. "Ethan?" He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked younger than his 35 years, and infinitely more fragile. I asked him, Ethan said, his voice a dry rasp. "I went to his office. I asked him why he said it, why he called you that. I sat on the coffee table opposite him, giving him space, and—" He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "He told me it was motivation. Jules, he said he was testing you. He said the Halberg family needs women with thick skin, and he was doing me a favor by toughening you up. He said I should thank him." I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. It was exactly what I expected Conrad to say. He rewrote reality to suit his ego. "And what did you say?" I asked. Ethan looked away, staring at the empty fireplace. "I told him it was cruel. I told him he humiliated you. And he told me to choose." Ethan's voice broke on the last word. He took a shuddering breath. "He said I could be his son, or I could be your husband, but I could not be both if I was going to be soft. He said loyalty is a binary choice." I reached out and touched Ethan's knee. It was vibrating with tension. "Ethan," I said gently, "you do not have to choose. You just have to stand up." He shook his head violently, pulling away from my touch. "You do not understand. Julia." "I cannot." "Why?" I asked. "Why can you not? Is it just fear? Because fear I can work with." "No!" he shouted, standing up and pacing the room. "It is not just fear. It is math." He spun around to face me, his face twisted with shame. "I owe him. Julia, I owe him everything." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You have your trust fund. You have your salary from the foundation." "Technically, yes," Ethan said, the words spilling out of him like a confession he had held for years. "But I leveraged it, 4 years ago. The yacht, the renovation on this penthouse, the investments I made in that tech startup that failed. I didn't have the cash. He co-signed the loans, but he structured them so that if I leave the family business, or if I act against the family interest, the loans are called immediately." I stared at him. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. Conrad hadn't just bullied his son. He had bought him. He had encouraged Ethan to live a life he couldn't afford, specifically to create a chain he could yank whenever he wanted control. "So you are trapped," I said quietly. "I am $3 million in debt to my own father." Ethan whispered, "If I walk away, I am bankrupt. I lose the apartment. I lose everything." He looked at me with pleading eyes. I cannot defend you. Jules, I literally cannot afford to defend you. I looked at the man I had married. I saw the fear, the weakness, and the manipulation that had shaped him. I didn't hate him. I pitied him. He was just another subsidiary. Conrad was stripping for parts. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. Okay, I said. Okay? Ethan blinked. You are not screaming? No. I said, I am not screaming, but I am setting a boundary. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I will not ask you to destroy yourself for me. Ethan, I will not ask you to go bankrupt, but I will not live under his thumb. I am going to fight him. I am going to win. And you are going to have to decide if you want to be married to the winner or if you want to be the collateral damage. I turned back to him. I suggest you get a therapist. Ethan, a real one, not the one on your father's payroll, because you need to figure out who you are when you are not being held hostage. Ethan looked at me as if he had never seen me before. You are going to fight him? He asked. How? He is a giant. Julia, giants fall the hardest. Ethan, especially when they are standing on cracked foundations. I left him in the living room. I couldn't save him tonight. I had to save myself. The next day, the war of paperwork turned dirty. I received a secure email from an anonymous Proton Mail account. I suspected it was Nolan again, or perhaps a disgruntled IT worker at HIL. The subject line was simply, "The Partner." Attached was a series of corporate registration documents from the Cayman Islands. I spent 3 hours tracing the shell companies. It was a maze of LLCs nested inside other LLCs, designed to obscure the ultimate beneficial owner. But whoever had set it up had made one mistake. They had used the same registered agent address for the final shell company, Aurora Holdings, as they had for a known entity I recognized. I cross-referenced the name. Aurora Holdings was managed by a man named Thomas Kessick, Marla Kessick's brother-in-law. I sat back, stunned. The connection was electric. Redwood Vale Capital wasn't just a predatory private equity firm, it was connected to the CFO's family. Marla Kessick wasn't just making the numbers work out of fear of Conrad. She was steering the deal to Redwood Vale because her family stood to profit from the fees and the subsequent asset stripping. It was corruption, pure and simple. Corporate malfeasance. If Conrad knew, he would destroy her. But did he know? Or was he being played too? I opened the second attachment. It was a leaked draft of the strategic partnership agreement between HIL and Redwood Vale. I skipped the boilerplate and went straight to the covenants and controls section. And there it was, the trap. Section 14.2. Performance default triggers. In the event that HIL fails to maintain an EBITDA margin of 12% for 2 consecutive quarters, Redwood Vale Capital shall assume majority voting rights on the board of directors. 12%. I checked HEL's current margin. The workers, Ben Miller and his union, would lose their pensions in the court proceedings. I would win my revenge, but innocent people would pay the price. I remembered my vow. No collateral damage. I closed the laptop. I could not use the scandal. It was too blunt a weapon. I had to choose a third path. I had to let the corruption continue just long enough to use it against them. I had to let Conrad sign the deal. Let him step into the trap. And then, before Redwood Vale could snap the jaws shut, I had to be the one to trigger the restructuring. I called David at Northbridge. Buy the bonds. I said, buy them all. Aggressively. He heard the urgency in my voice. What did you find? He asked. I found the timeline. I said, we do not have months. We have weeks. Conrad is about to sign a suicide pact. We need to own the debt before the ink dries. Copy that, David said. We are moving. 2 days later, Conrad announced a press conference. It was held at the Hallberg Tower, in the Grand Atrium. Cameras were set up in a semicircle. The Hallberg logo was projected onto a massive screen behind the podium. I stood in the back of the crowd, wearing sunglasses and a trench coat. I wasn't hiding, exactly, but I wasn't advertising my presence. Conrad walked onto the stage. He looked magnificent. He was radiating confidence. his silver hair catching the light. Ethan stood a few feet behind him, looking pale and stiff, like a prop that had been placed there by a set designer. Conrad gripped the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "there have been rumors, whispers. The market loves to speculate. But I am here to tell you the truth." He smiled that shark-like smile. "Halberg Industrial Logistics is stronger than ever. We are on the verge of a strategic evolution that will redefine the sector. We are not retreating. We are attacking." Applause broke out from the planted employees and the sycophantic junior executives. Conrad beamed. He believed it. He actually believed he was invincible. He didn't know his CFO was betraying him. He didn't know his biggest client was about to fire him. And he didn't know his daughter-in-law was buying his mortgage. I watched him bask in the applause. It was a performance. It was theater. And theater is fragile. One pulled wire, and the whole set comes down. I looked at Ethan. He caught my eye across the crowded room. For a second, his mask slipped. He looked at me with a mixture of longing and terror. He knew I was up to something, but he was too paralyzed to ask what. I turned my gaze back to Conrad. "Enjoy it. Conrad," I thought, "enjoy the applause. It is the last time you will hear it." He raised his hands for silence. "Family," he said, "that is what matters. We stand together. We protect our own." The irony was so thick I could taste it. He protected nothing but his own image. I checked my phone. A text message from David had just come through. "Transaction complete. We own 35% of the Class B bonds. We are the blocking vote." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Conrad finished his speech. The music swelled. The reporters shouted questions he ignored. I turned and walked out of the atrium, the sound of his voice fading behind me. He had announced that the company was stronger than ever. I walked out into the cool air of the street. I hailed a cab. Staged things can be rewritten. I whispered to myself, and I had the pen. The invitation to the Halberg estate for the family strategy weekend arrived on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with hand-gilded edges. It looked like a wedding invitation, but it felt like a summons. Ethan was relieved. He saw it as a peace offering, a sign that the ice age following the dinner was thawing. I saw it for what it was, a containment strategy. Conrad had sensed I was not drifting away, so he was pulling me close to see where the knives were hidden. The estate, known as Highgate, sat on 400 acres of manicured rolling hills north of the city. We drove up the winding gravel driveway, flanked by century-old oaks that cast long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. The house itself was a sprawling Georgian manor that looked less like a home and more like a museum dedicated to the concept of ownership. We were greeted by staff who knew our drink orders before we exited the car. Conrad met us in the foyer. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and corduroys, the costume of the landed gentry at leisure. "Julia," he said, opening his arms but not quite touching me. "I am so glad you came. We need fresh perspectives this weekend." He spent the first afternoon performing a masterclass in exclusion disguised as inclusion. He took me on a tour of the gallery wing, showing me his collection of Dutch masters. "You see the light in this one?" he asked, pointing to a small, dark oil painting of a merchant counting coins. "It is all about the unseen." The artist understood that true power is not the gold on the table. It is the ledger in the shadow. He looked at me, his blue eyes twinkling with mock benevolence. "You appreciate details. Julia, that is why you are good at your job. Operations is the art of counting the small things so the big men do not have to." He was putting me in my place. I was the clerk. He was the merchant. I was the help. He was the history. I smiled, keeping my hands clasped behind my back. "Actually, Conrad," I said, studying the painting, "that is a Van Ostade. The merchant isn't counting his own gold. He is counting debt. See the red seal on the parchment? He is insolvent. He is just trying to look rich before the sheriff arrives." Conrad's smile didn't waver, but the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You have a very grim imagination, my dear," he said. Later that evening, After a dinner where the conversation revolved entirely around the Foundation's benevolence, Conrad cornered me in the library. Ethan had gone to play billiards with his cousins. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing us in with the smell of leather and expensive brandy. He poured 2 glasses. He didn't offer me one. He sat in his wingback chair and gestured for me to sit on the sofa, placing me physically lower than him. "I know you have been asking questions," Conrad said. His voice was no longer the warm baritone of the host. It was the flat, metallic scrape of the CEO. "I have been doing my job," I said. "Your job is at Sterling Logistics," he said, "not HIL." He took a sip of brandy. "I know you are angry about the dinner. I admit, I was colorful. But do not confuse a bruised ego with a business strategy. You are looking for cracks in my floorboards because you want to see me trip. But be careful. Julia. If you pull up the floor, you might fall into the basement, and it is very dark down there." He leaned forward, his face shifting into a mask of pity. "You are a bright girl, but you are out of your depth. You think you understand leverage? I invented it. Go back to your spreadsheets. Manage your little trucks. Leave the empire building to the people who were born for it." He sat back, dismissing me. It was the born for it that did it. The absolute genetic arrogance of a man who believed his DNA was a currency. I did not stand up. I did not leave. I crossed my legs and looked him in the eye. "Stonewater Retail Group," I said. Conrad froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me?" "Stonewater," I repeated, my voice conversational. "They account for 42% of HIL's revenue. Their contract expires in 5 months. Their CEO, Marcus Thorne, is currently soliciting bids from 3 other carriers because your on-time delivery rate has dropped below 85%. Conrad lowered the glass slowly. The amusement vanished. In its place was something raw and ugly. "That is proprietary information," he whispered. "It is visible if you know where to look," I said. "You slashed the maintenance budget to pretty up the EBITDA for Redwood Vale. But you forgot that trucks do not run on accounting tricks. They run on transmissions, and yours are failing." I leaned forward, mirroring his posture. "You are not selling HIL because you want a strategic partnership. Conrad, you are selling it because you are bleeding out, and you are hoping Redwood Vale signs the check before Stonewater sends the termination letter." For a moment, I thought he might throw the glass at me. His face turned a mottled red. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so hard the leather creaked. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see trash. He saw a predator. And in that split second, I saw fear. It was a flicker, quick as a heartbeat, but it was there. He was terrified, not of me, but of being seen. He had spent 40 years building a myth of infallibility, and I had just pointed out the zipper on the costume. "Get out," he hissed. I stood up smoothly. "Good night, Conrad. Thank you for the tour." I walked out of the library. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were steady. I had poked the bear. Now I had to make sure the trap was set before he mauled me. The next week was a blur of invisible money. I met with David and the Northbridge team in a soundproof war room. The atmosphere was clinical. We weren't emotional avengers. We were surgeons preparing for a transplant. "We need to reach the blocking position," David said, pointing to a digital ticker on the wall. "We are at 22% of the bond issuance. We need 34% to force a seat at the creditor table during a restructuring event." Northbridge moved with terrifying speed. They didn't buy large blocks that would trigger market alerts. They bought in fragments, picking up debt from pension funds, insurance companies, and high-yield index managers. They used shell vehicles and algorithmic trading to mask the accumulation. I watched the numbers climb on the screen. 25%, 28%, 30%. It was a strange feeling. We were buying Conrad's promises. Every bond was a contract where he had sworn to pay, and we were buying the right to hold him to it. Money, I realized, was both invisible and sharp. It could cut you without ever touching your skin. "Keep buying," I said. He is going to try to close the Redwood deal in 10 days. We need the hammer before then, but the real breakthrough didn't come from the market. It came from the conscience I had correctly identified as the weak link. Marla Kessick contacted me on a Tuesday night. She used a burner phone. Parking garage, 4th level, the one near the hospital. Midnight. I went. It felt like a cliché from a noir film. The damp concrete, the hum of the sodium lights, the smell of exhaust. Marla was sitting in her sedan, the engine off. She looked 10 years older than she had at the conference. I got into the passenger seat. I am not wearing a wire, I said. Marla didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead at the concrete wall. He is going to fire me, she said. When the Redwood deal closes, he is going to scapegoat me for the maintenance cuts. He is already building the paper trail. I found memos I never wrote in the compliance file. She turned to me, her eyes wide with panic. I am not going to prison for him. Julia, I have kids. Then give me the weapon. I said, why is he so desperate for this specific deal? Why Redwood Vale? There are other buyers, better buyers. Marla took a shaky breath. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thumb drive. It is not just the company, she whispered. It is the side letter. I took the drive. What side letter? Conrad pledged the HIL stock as collateral, she said, but not for the company's debt, for his own. I stared at her. Explain. 3 years ago, Conrad made bad bets on foreign currency derivatives, personal bets. He lost nearly $50 million. He covered it by taking a private loan from a shadow lender, a group connected to the partners at Redwood Vale. My mind raced. This was the missing piece. The loan agreement has a trigger. Marla continued. If he loses majority control of the Hallberg Holding Company, or if HIL's valuation drops below a certain peg, the loan is called immediately. He doesn't have the cash to pay it. If they call the loan, they take his personal shares. He loses the foundation. He loses the estate. He loses everything. She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. The Redwood Vale deal isn't a partnership. It is a protection racket. They are agreeing to forgive the personal loan in exchange for stripping the assets of HIL. He is feeding the company to the wolves to save his own skin. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just incompetence or greed. It was a breach of fiduciary duty so massive it bordered on criminal fraud. He was sacrificing 2,000 workers' livelihoods to cover his own gambling debts. I gripped the thumb drive. This is it. Marla, this is the kill shot. Marla grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate. You cannot use it yet. If this comes out now, the SEC freezes everything. The company locks down. Redwood walks away. And the lenders liquidate HIL to pay the debts. The company dies. I know, I said, pulling my arm back. We do not leak it. We use it to force a surrender. I left her in the garage. I drove home with the evidence burning a hole in my pocket. We had the legal route now. I met with Northbridge's outside counsel, a woman named Eleanor who spoke in paragraphs that cost $1,000 an hour. It is a breach of the duty of loyalty. Eleanor said, reviewing the files, if we present this to the board, the real board, not his cronies, they will have no choice but to remove him. But Marla is right. A public scandal destroys the asset value. So we offer a tender. I said, we offer to buy the debt at par, plus a restructuring proposal that keeps the company solvent. We present the board with 2 doors. Door A is a public lawsuit exposing Conrad's fraud. Door B is a quiet sale to Northbridge with a leadership change. Eleanor smiled. The velvet hammer. I like it. We spent the next 2 days drafting the documents. The proposal was a masterpiece of corporate governance. It outlined a fully funded plan to restore the maintenance budget, protect the pension fund, and retain the workforce. It was the boring turnaround David had promised. But I had forgotten the variable I couldn't control. Ethan. I came home late on Thursday. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet. I walked into the study. The safe was open. My heart stopped. I had left the Onyx operations binder in the safe. It contained the debt purchase records, the Northbridge strategy, and the notes from my meeting with Marla. Ethan was sitting at my desk. The binder was open in front of him. He looked up. His face was gray. You are buying the bonds, he said. His voice was hollow. Ethan, I started, stepping forward. You are buying the debt, he repeated. Louder. You are working with a takeover firm. You are planning to hostilely acquire my father's company. I closed the door. I am planning to save the company. Ethan, before your father drives it off a cliff. Save it? He laughed, a high, hysterical sound. You are building a case to destroy him. I read the notes. Julia. Breach of duty. Personal insolvency. You are compiling a dossier to send him to jail. He stood up, shaking the binder at me. He is my father. He is a fraud. Ethan? I snapped, my patience finally snapping. Read the rest of it. He leveraged the company to pay for his own gambling losses. He is selling the workers out to cover his own mistakes. I do not believe it, Ethan said. He would not do that. This is you twisting things, because you are angry, because he insulted you. He threw the binder onto the desk. Papers slid across the mahogany. You are vindictive. Julia. He was right about you. You are just waiting for a chance to tear us down because you never really felt like one of us. The accusation hit me like a slap. But it didn't hurt. It clarified. I walked over to the desk. I picked up the binder and closed it. I am not trying to destroy your family. Ethan, I said quietly, your father already did that. I am just reading the receipts. Ethan stared at me, his chest heaving. I cannot let you do this, he said. I have to tell him. I looked at him. This was the moment, the choice he had been dreading. If you tell him, I said, my voice steady, you are complicit. When this comes out, and it will come out, Ethan, whether I do it or the FBI does, you will be the man who knew about the fraud and helped cover it up. You will go down with him. Ethan flinched. The fear was back. The financial fear. The legal fear. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, I said. He backed away. He looked at the phone on the desk, then at me. He didn't pick it up. He turned and ran out of the room. I heard the front door slam a moment later. He wouldn't tell Conrad. Not yet. He was too cowardly to face his father with bad news, and too terrified of legal exposure to implicate himself. He would go to a bar. He would drink. He would hide. But the clock was ticking faster now. The next morning, the domino fell. I was at my office at Sterling when the news hit the trade wire. Stonewater Retail Group issues notice of breach to Hallberg. Industrial Logistics. The article was brief but devastating. Stonewater had formally notified HIL that due to consistent failure to meet service-level agreements, they were initiating the 90-day termination clause. The stock of Hallberg Holdings dipped 4% in 10 minutes. I knew exactly what Conrad would do. He wouldn't fix the trucks. He wouldn't apologize. He would panic. My phone rang. It was Nolan. He is screaming. Nolan whispered, he just ordered a 20% reduction in workforce. Immediate effect. He wants to show the market he is optimizing costs to offset the Stonewater risk. He is pouring gasoline on the fire. I said, if he fires the drivers now, he guarantees the service failure. Stonewater will walk immediately. He does not care, Nolan said. He needs the cash flow to look positive for the Redwood closing next week. He is burning the furniture to heat the house for 5 more minutes. I hung up. I couldn't let him fire 20% of the staff. If the workforce left, there would be nothing for Northbridge to buy. I had to buy time. I needed to stop Stonewater from pulling the trigger fully. I called an old contact, a logistics consultant named Sarah, who was currently advising Stonewater's operations team. I couldn't call Stonewater directly. That would be tortious interference. But I could talk to Sarah. We met for coffee. I didn't tell her I was planning a takeover. I told her I was acting as a concerned industry peer. Sarah, I said, if Stonewater fires HIL, who picks up the volume? Nobody, she admitted. The market is tight. It will take us 6 months to transition. It will be a nightmare. What if there was a plan? I asked. A hypothetical plan. What if HIL had new leadership? Leadership that would ring-fence the maintenance budget and guarantee the service levels. Sarah looked at me over her latte. Hypothetically? She asked. hypothetically. If there was a credible plan, backed by capital, Stonewater would pause the termination. We do not want to switch carriers. We just want the trucks to show up. That is what I needed to hear. I passed a message through Sarah to the VP of Logistics at Stonewater, a generic, unattributed white paper on how a turnaround at HIL could work. It was detailed, it was competent, it was specific, it was bait. 2 hours later, Stonewater issued a second statement. Stonewater Retail Group remains in discussions with HIL regarding performance remediation. They hadn't canceled, they were waiting. They had seen the competency in the white paper and paused to see if it was real. I had bought us a week. But Conrad knew. He didn't know about Northbridge. He didn't know about the bonds, but he knew that Stonewater had blinked, and he knew that only an operator could have convinced them to wait. He connected the dots. My phone rang at 11 at night. I was in the kitchen, staring at the lights of the city. The caller ID said, Conrad Halberg. I answered, Hello, Conrad. His voice was ice, cold, brittle, and sharp. You are meddling. Julia, I am trying to keep your biggest client from leaving. Conrad, someone had to. There was a silence on the line. A breathing, heavy silence. I know you are talking to people, he said. I know you are asking questions about the pension fund. I know you are digging into things that do not concern you. Everything concerns me. Conrad, I am family, remember? He laughed. A short bark of a laugh. You are nothing, he said. You are a guest who overstayed her welcome. I made a mistake letting you in. But I can correct mistakes. If you are playing games, Julia, I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I will bury you in lawsuits so deep you will need a submarine to see the sun. I will turn Ethan against you until he hates the sound of your name. I gripped the phone. His threats didn't scare me anymore. They sounded like the desperate thrashing of a man drowning in his own lies. I walked to the window. I looked at the reflection of my own face. I didn't look tired. I looked ready. You already tried. Conrad, I said, my voice softer than he expected. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. You tried to ruin me at dinner. You tried to ruin me with your son. You tried to ruin me with your pity. I took a breath. That is why this will work. Because you think I am afraid of losing. But I have already lost the only thing that mattered to you, your approval. And now that I do not want it, I can see exactly what you are. What am I? He sneered. You are insolvent. Conrad. I hung up the phone. I turned it off. I went to the bedroom. Ethan wasn't there. I lay down in the empty bed. The silence of the penthouse was heavy, but for the first time in months. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The game was over. The war was about to begin. The breach did not happen with a bang. It happened with a notification on a Bloomberg terminal at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday. Stonewater Retail Group had officially paused their quarterly settlement payment. They cited material breach of service-level agreements and invoked their right to withhold funds pending a performance audit. That withheld payment was $12 million. Without that cash, Halberg Industrial Logistics missed its debt service coverage ratio by 0.4%. It was a rounding error to the universe. But to a bank, it was a gunshot. The covenants on the Halberg bonds, the ones Northbridge and I now owned 35% of, were strict. A breach of the coverage ratio triggered an automatic event of default. It gave the lenders the right to accelerate the debt, meaning we could demand full repayment of the principal immediately. Conrad did not have the principal. He had a lot of paintings, a lot of real estate, and a lot of pride. But he did not have $200 million in cash. The call went out an hour later. The board of directors of Halberg Holdings was summoned for an emergency session. The official agenda said, strategic review. The unofficial agenda was panic. I stood in the lobby of the Halberg Tower, checking my reflection in the polished granite wall. I was wearing a black suit, sharp and tailored. No jewelry, no wedding ring. I had left it on the nightstand that morning. Today. I was not a wife. I was a creditor. David from Northbridge stood beside me. holding a thick leather portfolio. "Are you ready?" he asked. I adjusted my cuff. "I am ready." We took the elevator to the 42nd floor. The silence in the car was heavy. When the doors opened, the atmosphere in the executive suite was frantic. Assistants were running with files. Phones were ringing. We walked past the receptionist, who tried to stop us. "Excuse me," she said, breathless. "Mrs. Halberg, you cannot go in there. It is a closed session." I did not stop walking. "I am not here as Mrs. Halberg," I said. "I am here representing the ad hoc committee of bondholders." I pushed open the double doors to the boardroom. The room went silent. Conrad was standing at the head of the table, his face flushed, shouting at the general counsel. Ethan was sitting to his right, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. The independent directors were huddled over their tablets, looking terrified. Conrad spun around. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed. "Julia," he barked, "get out. This is a board meeting, not a family therapy session. Go wait in the car." I walked to the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, the seat reserved for opposing counsel, and sat down. David sat beside me. I placed my hands on the table. "We are not here for therapy." "Conrad," I said, "we are here because you are in default." Conrad laughed. It was a brittle, cracking sound. "Default? Do not be ridiculous. We have a temporary liquidity timing issue. It will be resolved when the Redwood Vale deal closes next week. The Redwood Vale deal is dead," David said calmly. He slid a document across the polished mahogany. "We have exercised our rights under the indenture agreement. As the holders of the blocking position of your Series B debt, we are formally objecting to any asset sale until the default is cured. You cannot sell HIL to Redwood Vale. You cannot sell a stapler without our permission." Conrad picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the header. He looked at David, then at me. "You," he whispered, "you bought the debt. I bought the truth." "Conrad," I said. He threw the paper down. "She is doing this out of spite," he shouted to the board, gesturing wildly at me. "Look at her. She is a scorned woman. She is emotional. She is trying to blow up the company because I hurt her feelings at a dinner party." He looked at the directors, his eyes pleading for them to share his outrage. "Are we going to let a hysteric dictate the future of this firm? She is unstable. She does not understand the first thing about high finance. She is just lashing out." The room turned to me. I saw the doubt in the eyes of the independent directors. They knew the story. They knew about the trash comment. It was an easy narrative to believe. The angry daughter-in-law seeking vengeance. I did not raise my voice. I did not get angry. I reached into my bag and pulled out a 3-inch binder. I opened it. "Gentlemen," I said, ignoring Conrad, "if we could turn to tab 3. I waited. The silence stretched. "This is a log of the maintenance deferrals for the heavy haul fleet over the last 18 months. I said, "On page 14, you will see a directive signed by the CEO's office to extend brake pad replacement intervals from 50,000 miles to 80,000 miles. This decision saved the company $400,000 in Q2. I turned the page. "On page 15, you will see the safety incident report from last month. 2 brake failures on the I-95 corridor. One resulted in a jackknife that destroyed a shipment for Stonewater Retail Group. That accident is the direct cause of the contract breach notice you received this morning." I looked up. I locked eyes with the chairman of the audit committee. "I am not here because I am emotional." I said, "I am here because you are negligent. You cut safety to inflate your margins for a sale. You traded operational integrity for a short-term valuation bump, and now the bill has come due." Conrad slammed his fist on the table. "These are internal documents. You stole them. This is corporate espionage. I am a shareholder." "Conrad," I said coolly, "and now I am a creditor. I have a right to know why my asset is burning." He sneered. "You do not know what you are talking about. Those maintenance schedules were approved by engineering. Were they?" I looked toward the door. "Mr. Greer?" The door opened. Nolan Greer walked in. Conrad went pale. Nolan was his shadow, his vault, Nolan had been with the company since before I was born. Nolan, Conrad said, his voice dropping to a warning growl. What are you doing? Nolan did not look at Conrad. He walked to the table and placed a single file folder in front of the audit chairman. He looked tired. His suit, usually immaculate, was rumpled. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week, but who had finally woken up. I was instructed to route the engineering objections to a suppression file. Nolan said quietly. His voice was steady, but thin. The chief engineer recommended against the break interval change. He called it criminally negligent. Conrad ordered me to remove that memo from the board packet in June. Conrad stared at him. The betrayal was absolute. You ungrateful little rat. Conrad hissed. I made you. I am tired. Conrad, Nolan said. He looked at his boss for the first time, and there was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, gray exhaustion. I am just tired of carrying the water when I know it is poisoned. Nolan turned and walked out. He did not wait for permission. The room was deadly silent. The directors were reading the file Nolan had left. The standard procedure defense was dead. This was willful suppression of risk. But I wasn't done. I checked my watch. Ms. Kessick? I said. Marla Kessick did not walk in. She wasn't that brave. But the general counsel's phone buzzed. He looked at it, frowned, and then looked up. His face white. Mr. Chairman, the general counsel said, I have just received a formal resignation email from Marla Kessick. She has also copied the SEC and our external counsel. He tapped his screen, projecting the email onto the wall monitor. Effective immediately. I resign as CFO. Attached is a compliance packet detailing the irregular accounting practices regarding the valuation of the HIL subsidiary, specifically the capitalization of routine repair costs. These practices were directed by the CEO over my written objections. The room erupted. Directors were shouting. The lawyer was typing furiously. Conrad stood alone at the head of the table. He looked small. The giant of industry, the man who toasted to legacy, was suddenly just an old man in a room full of people who realized he was a liability. He looked at me. His eyes were full of hate, pure and distilled. You think this makes you smart? He spat. You think destroying your own family makes you a winner? I did not flinch. I am not destroying the family. Conrad, I am saving the company from the family. Conrad turned to Ethan. Ethan, he roared. Fix this. Tell them this is a lie. Ethan sat frozen. He looked at the chaos around him. He looked at his father, red-faced and screaming. He looked at me, calm and prepared. Ethan, Conrad demanded, we need to vote to adjourn. I need your proxy. Sign the emergency authorization. We can fire the board. We can lock this down. He slid a paper toward Ethan. It was a shareholder resolution that required the signature of the Halberg Trust, which Ethan controlled technically. Though Conrad held the strings, Ethan picked up the pen. His hand was trembling. Sign it, Conrad screamed. Or so help me God. I will call the loans. Ethan, you will be on the street by tonight. The threat hung in the air. The board members stopped shouting. They looked at Ethan. They heard it. The blackmail. Ethan looked at the pen. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. I did not signal him. I did not nod. I just watched. This was his war, not mine. Ethan put the pen down. No, Ethan said. Conrad blinked. What? No, Ethan repeated. His voice was stronger this time. He stood up. He pushed the paper back toward his father. I am not signing it. Ethan, Conrad warned, his voice low and dangerous. Think about what you are doing. Think about the debt. I am thinking about it. Ethan said, and I am realizing that bankruptcy is cheaper than your approval. Ethan turned to the board. My father co-signed $3 million in personal loans for me. Ethan said to the room, he has used those loans to control my vote on this board for 4 years. He threatened to call them if I did not support his motions. That is why I stayed silent about the dinner. That is why I stayed silent about the maintenance cuts. Ethan took a deep breath. I am compromised. I am recusing myself from this vote. and I am formally stating that the CEO has been manipulating the governance of this family for his own benefit." Conrad looked as if he had been shot. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His own leverage, the trap he had built for his son, had just snapped back and broken his wrist. The chairman of the board, a stern man named Arthur, who represented the pension funds, stood up. "That is enough," Arthur said. He turned to Conrad. "Conrad, in light of the default, the resignation of your CFO, and the testimony regarding document suppression, I am calling for a vote of no confidence." "You cannot do that," Conrad shouted. "I built this. I am this company." The vote was taken. It was unanimous. Motion carries. Arthur said, "Conrad, you are removed as acting chair of HIL and suspended as CEO of Halberg Holdings, pending an internal investigation. Please surrender your badge and keys." Conrad stood there for a long moment. He looked at the room he had ruled for 40 years. He looked at the empty chair where Nolan used to sit. He looked at Ethan, who was staring at the floor, and then he looked at me. He straightened his jacket. He smoothed his silver hair. He summoned every ounce of dignity he had left, which was considerable, even in defeat. He walked toward the door. As he passed me, he stopped. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. "You think you won," he whispered, "but you do not know what you bought. You bought a corpse, Julia, and you will pay for it in ways money can't fix." He walked out. The double doors swung shut behind him. The room exhaled. I did not celebrate. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me, heavy and gray. Arthur turned to me. "Ms. Bryant," he said, "you and your group hold the debt. You effectively control the restructuring. What is your proposal?" I stood up. I walked to the whiteboard. "We do not liquidate," I said. "We operate." I spent the next 3 hours laying out the plan. It was the plan I had written in my study, the plan I had dreamed of while looking at the spreadsheets. "We are going to make a tender offer for the equity." I said, "Northbridge will take the company private. We will inject $50 million in capital immediately to cure the maintenance backlog." "What about the workforce?" asked a director. "The standard playbook is a 30% reduction." "No," I said firmly. The room went quiet. "No layoffs." I said, "We need the drivers. If we fire them, Stonewater leaves. The workforce is the asset. But the costs?" Someone started. "We cut the executive bonuses." I said, "We cut the foundation's management fee. We close the private aviation department. We sell the corporate retreat in Aspen. We find the money in the fat, not the muscle." I looked at them, and we put a severance plan in place for any unavoidable redundancy in the back office. 3 months' pay, full benefits. We treat people with dignity, not because it is nice, but because it stops them from suing us and destroying the brand. Arthur nodded slowly. "That is unusual," he said, "but given the reputational damage we have just sustained, it might be necessary." By the time I left the boardroom, the sun was setting. The hallways were buzzing with rumors. As I walked to the elevator, I saw a group of administrative assistants standing near the copier. They stopped talking when they saw me. One of them, a woman who had worked there for 20 years, nodded to me. It wasn't a bow, it was a mark of respect. They knew what had happened. They knew I had stopped the bleeding. I walked out into the cool evening air. I went to a hotel. I couldn't go back to the penthouse. Ethan was there. Or maybe he wasn't. I didn't know what we were anymore. We were allies in a war that was over. But that didn't mean we were husband and wife. The next 2 weeks were a blur of lawyers and bankers. The public narrative shifted. The press reported that Conrad Halberg had stepped down due to health reasons. The stock stabilized. Rumors began to circulate about a mystery buyer who was backing the turnaround. The market liked the mystery. They liked the idea of a fresh start. I worked 18-hour days. I met with Stonewater. I met with the union. I shook hands with Ben Miller, who looked at me with a grudging respect and said, "You actually did it. You kept the pension." I did. "Ben," I said, "it is in the contract. On the morning of the acquisition, I sat in the North Bridge conference room. It was dawn. The city below was blue and gray. Waking up. The final papers were stacked in front of me. The acquisition of HIL by Onyx Operations, backed by Northbridge Capital. I was signing as the incoming CEO. David handed me a pen. "This is it, Julia," he said. "You own it?" I took the pen. My hand was steady. I signed my name, Julia Bryant. Not Halberg, just Bryant. I put the pen down. It was done. I had bought the company that called me trash. I had fired the man who said it. I felt a sense of peace, cold and clear. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. It was a message from an unknown number. There was no text, just an image. I opened it. It was a grainy photo, taken from a distance, likely through a telephoto lens or a car window. It showed a street corner in the financial district. 2 men were standing there, shaking hands. One was Ethan. He looked disheveled, wearing the same coat he had worn at the board meeting. The other man was slick, wearing a blue suit with a distinctive red pocket square. I recognized him. It was the managing partner of Redwood Vale, the shark who was supposed to have been chased away. My blood ran cold. Why was Ethan meeting with Redwood Vale? Was he negotiating a separate peace? Was he selling out his shares in the holding company? Or was he doing something worse? The text bubble popped up again. A single sentence appeared under the photo. He didn't refuse the signature because he found a conscience. He refused it because he found a better deal. I stared at the screen. The victory, which had felt so solid a moment ago, suddenly felt like smoke. Conrad's whisper echoed in my ear. "You bought a corpse." I looked at the signature on the acquisition papers. The ink was still wet. I hadn't just bought a company. I had bought a battlefield. And I realized, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that the person holding the other side of the map wasn't Conrad anymore. It was my husband. Acquisition day in Linden Harbor felt less like a business transaction and more like an execution. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unfallen rain. And the air in the conference room on the 52nd floor was so cold, it made the coffee in the porcelain cups go tepid within minutes. I walked into the room at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was wearing a navy suit, the color of a deep ocean, and I carried nothing but a single fountain pen. I did not need files. I had memorized every line of the closing documents. Conrad Halberg was already there. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a position he had occupied for 40 years. He was not looking at the lawyers who were arranging stacks of paper like dominoes. He was looking at the door, waiting for me. When I entered, he didn't scowl. He smiled. It was a thin, tight expression, like a crack in a frozen lake. "Good morning, Julia," he said. "You look tired. The weight of the crown, I suppose." I pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table. "Good morning, Conrad. The weight is manageable when you are not carrying secrets." He chuckled, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. Beside him, his personal attorney looked pale. The attorney knew what was in the documents. Conrad, in his arrogance, perhaps still believed he could talk his way out of the ink. The process was formal, conducted in the hushed tones of high finance. David from Northbridge sat to my right. We were the acquirers. Technically, the vehicle was Onyx Operations, acting as the general partner for a Northbridge special purpose vehicle, but in reality, it was me. I was the one buying the debt. I was the one triggering the change of control. The general counsel began reading the summary of terms. It was a litany of legalese, transfer of assets, assumption of liabilities, restructuring of the bond covenants. Conrad listened, tapping his finger on the table. When the lawyer reached the section on executive leadership transition, Conrad raised a hand. Pause. Conrad said, the room froze. "I have a concern about the interim CEO appointment," Conrad said, looking directly at me. "The bylaws state that the CEO must have at least 10 years of executive experience within the Halberg Group or a comparable Fortune 500 entity. Julia runs a logistics firm that services regional bakeries. She is not qualified. I am blocking the appointment under Article 6 of the corporate charter." He leaned back, satisfied. He thought he had found the technicality that would keep me out of his chair. I didn't speak. I looked at David. David cleared his throat. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Conrad," David said gently, "we are aware of Article 6. However, we are also in possession of the side letter you signed with the lenders regarding your personal liquidity facility." Conrad went rigid. "That is private." Conrad snapped. "It is relevant," David corrected. "The side letter stipulates that if Halberg Industrial Logistics enters default, which it has, your voting rights regarding operational management are suspended to protect the collateral. You do not have a vote. Conrad, you surrendered it 3 years ago when you borrowed $50 million to cover your currency losses." Conrad stared at the paper. He looked at his lawyer. The lawyer nodded slowly, staring at the table. The trap Conrad had built to hide his gambling debts had just snapped shut on his own leg. He had traded his control for secrecy, and now he had neither. Conrad's face turned a violent shade of red. He looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like heat. "You dug deep," he whispered. "I dug until I hit the bottom." "Conrad," I said, "and you were buried there." The signing continued. Conrad had to sign the transfer deeds. If he refused, the personal loan would be called, and he would lose the estate, the art collection, and the foundation. He was a hostage to his own greed. He signed. His signature was jagged. Angry spikes of black ink. When the final document was notarized, the general counsel looked up. "The transaction is complete. Ownership of Halberg Industrial Logistics is now transferred to the acquisition group." I stood up. "Thank you," I said to the room. I looked at Conrad. "Please vacate the office." I said, "We have an all-hands meeting in the atrium in 30 minutes. Conrad stood up slowly. He buttoned his jacket. "You will fail," he said quietly. "The drivers do not respect you. The clients do not know you. You are a tourist here. I will see you in the atrium." Conrad. I walked out. I didn't watch him leave. The atrium of the Halberg Tower was a cavern of glass and steel. It was packed. 700 employees stood on the marble floor. Administrative staff, junior analysts, dispatchers, on the large screens. The feed was being broadcast to the depots and warehouses across the country, where 2,000 drivers and mechanics were watching. The atmosphere was tense. They expected a butcher. They expected a private equity raider to announce layoffs, pension cuts, and a sale of the assets. I walked onto the stage. There was no applause, just a heavy, anxious silence. I approached the microphone. I didn't hide behind a podium. I stood in the center of the stage, visible from head to toe. "My name is Julia Bryant," I began. My voice echoed slightly in the vast space. "I am not here to sell this company. I am here to work for it." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. "I know the rumors," I continued. "You have heard that the pension is gone. You have heard that the fleet is being sold. You have heard that 20% of you will be out of a job by Monday." I paused. Those rumors were true. That was the plan of the previous administration. I saw heads turn. I saw whispers start. But that is not my plan. I said, my voice rising, "My plan is simple. We are restoring the maintenance budget effective immediately. The pension fund is being ring-fenced and protected by a new legal trust that cannot be accessed by the company for operational debts, and there will be no mass layoffs." The room went dead silent. They didn't believe me yet. "We are a logistics company," I said. "We move things, and the most important thing we move is trust. If our drivers do not trust the brakes, they cannot drive. If our clients do not trust the schedule, they do not pay. And if you do not trust leadership, this company dies." I took a breath. To build that trust, we need to make changes. We need leadership that understands the difference between a balance sheet and a human being. I looked toward the side of the stage, where the executive team was standing. Conrad was there, watching from the shadows, his face a mask of fury. "Effective immediately," I said. "Conrad Halberg is relieved of his duties as chairman and CEO." The gasp that went through the room sucked the air out of the atrium. Conrad Halberg was not just a boss. He was a monument. He was the name on the building. I looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting to the drivers. This company needs leadership that does not confuse people with property. I said. The line landed like a hammer. It was the answer to his insult. He called me trash. I called him a slave driver. He judged me by my fork. I judged him by his ethics. Conrad stepped out of the shadows. For a second, I thought he would storm the stage. He looked at me, and his smile vanished completely. In that moment, he realized the truth. I hadn't become him to beat him. I hadn't become a tyrant. I had remained an operator, and that was why I had won. He turned and walked toward the exit doors, alone. For a second, no one moved. Then, somewhere in the back, maybe from the dispatch team, maybe from a secretary who had been silenced for years, a single person started clapping. Then another, then another. It wasn't a roar. It was a steady, rhythmic applause. It was the sound of people realizing they could breathe again. I walked off the stage. My hands were shaking, but my head was high. But victory in the 21st century is never clean. It is broadcast, dissected, and spun. By noon, the online narrative had exploded. Conrad didn't go quietly into retirement. He went to his contacts in the media. He leaked a story to a major financial blog, written by a journalist who had spent decades dining at the Hallberg estate. The headline was brutal. The Black Widow of Linden Harbor. How Julia Hallberg manipulated her husband and staged a coup. The article was a masterpiece of distortion. It claimed I had used my access as a wife to steal confidential documents. It claimed I had emotionally manipulated Ethan into betraying his father. It painted Conrad as a benevolent patriarch, blindsided by a Lady Macbeth figure who married for money and destroyed the family when she didn't get enough attention. My phone lit up with notifications. Comments on social media were vicious. Half of them called me a hero for saving the jobs. The other half called me a snake. She stole the company from the man who built it. Ungrateful. This is what happens when you let outsiders in. I sat in the CEO's office, Conrad's old office, watching the ticker of hate scroll by. I had saved 2,000 families from poverty, but to the world, I was just a woman who didn't know her place. The door opened. It was Ethan. I hadn't seen him since the board meeting. He looked like a ghost. His eyes were hollow, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He held a tablet in his hand. He saw the article. He said, his voice was rough. I turned my chair to face him. I saw it. Ethan, your father works fast. Ethan walked into the room. He didn't sit. He paced. He is destroying you. Ethan said, he is destroying us. He already destroyed us. Ethan, the moment he made you choose. Ethan stopped pacing. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of the man I had fallen in love with. The gentle, thoughtful man who had been crushed by the weight of his last name. I need to tell you something, he said. I waited. The photo, he said, the one you saw, me with Redwood Vale. I felt a cold spike in my chest. You know about the photo? Nolan told me you received it, Ethan said. Nolan is playing both sides. Jules, he wants to survive. Ethan took a breath. I met with them, yes, but not to sell you out. Then why? I asked. Why were you shaking hands with the Sharks? I was negotiating a release, Ethan said. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I told Redwood Vale that if they didn't release me from the cross-collateralization agreement, the one that tied my debts to my father's, I would go to the SEC and testify about the side letter. I threatened them. Jules, for the first time in my life, I used the Hallberg name to threaten someone. He handed me the paper. It was a release form. It stated that Ethan Hallberg was absolved of all liabilities related to the Aurora Holdings loan facility. I did it so I could be free. He whispered, so I could stand with you without him holding a gun to my head. I looked at the document. It looked legitimate. I looked at Ethan's face. He was crying, silent tears running down his exhausted face. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to stand up and hug him and tell him we could rebuild. But I was the CEO now. I was an operator, and operators check the footnotes. I flipped to the second page of the document, and there it was. Clause 14b, residual advisory rights. In exchange for said release, the signatory agrees to grant the lender's désigné non-voting observer status on the board of directors of the acquiring entity for a period of 24 months. With full access to all privileged financial reporting. I froze. Ethan, I said, my voice trembling, did you read Clause 14b? He blinked. The what? No, it was standard boilerplate. The lawyer said it was just administrative. I looked at him. I saw the confusion in his eyes. Was it real? Or was he acting? Clause 14b gives Redwood Vale a seat at my table. Ethan, it gives them access to every number, every strategy, every weakness, and Redwood Vale is the proxy for your father. I stood up, the paper shaking in my hand. You didn't get free. Ethan, you opened the back door. Ethan's face went white. He grabbed the paper. No, he said, no, that is not what it means. They said it was just for compliance, to ensure the loan was closed out properly. Ethan, I said, my voice hard. You signed it. I didn't know. I was just trying to fix it. I looked at my husband. I saw a man who was either a master manipulator or a fool. And I didn't know which was worse. If he was a fool, he was dangerous. If he was a manipulator, he was my enemy. Conrad had planted a listening device in my boardroom, and he had used his own son to carry it in. I walked to the window. The city lights were turning on below. A grid of amber and white. The victory turned to ash in my mouth. I had the company. I had the title. But I had a spy in my house. I realized then that the war wasn't over. It had just moved indoors. If I accused Ethan publicly of betraying me, I would destroy my marriage. The press would have a field day. Husband sabotages wife. I would look weak, unable to control my own home. But if I stayed silent, Conrad would be sitting in every board meeting, invisible but present, watching for me to stumble. My psychology fractured. It wasn't a break. It was a hairline crack in the glass. I felt a profound, exhausting paranoia settle over me. I couldn't trust the man I slept next to. I couldn't trust the staff who smiled at me. I was the queen of a kingdom built on quicksand. I turned back to Ethan. He was slumping in the chair, his head in his hands. Get out, I said softly. Jules, please, go home. Ethan, I have work to do. He left. I sat alone in the office. I looked at the portrait of Conrad that still hung on the wall. His painted eyes seemed to follow me. You will pay for it in ways money can't fix. He was right. But I wasn't done paying. I picked up the phone. I called David at Northbridge. David, I said, we have a problem with the governance structure. What kind of problem? David asked. A transparency problem. We have a leak. We have a potential backdoor. I took a deep breath. I knew what I had to do. It was the nuclear option. It would hurt me. It would hurt the company's reputation in the short term. It would make enemies of everyone who liked secrets. I want to initiate a radical transparency audit. I said. David was silent. Julia, that is extreme. I want a third-party forensic firm to audit every email, every transaction, every side deal, and every contract from the last 5 years, and I want to publish the results, all of them, to the public. Julia, David warned, the market hates uncertainty. If you air the dirty laundry, the stock will tank. Our investors will be furious. You will be exposing your husband, your in-laws, everyone. You will be burning the house down to kill a rat. I looked at the city. The rat is already in the walls. David, if we do not burn it out, it will eat the foundation. But the cost of silence is higher. I said, I promised the workers truth. I promised them I wouldn't confuse people with property. If I hide this, I am just Conrad with a different haircut. I paused. Set up the meeting. I am blowing the whistle on my own company. I hung up. I sat there in the dark. I was the CEO. I was the owner. And I was about to become the most dangerous thing in the corporate world, a woman with nothing left to hide. I picked up the fountain pen. I looked at the release form Ethan had signed. I drew a line through his signature. It didn't change the legal reality, but it changed mine. I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was the operator. And operators fix the broken parts, no matter how much it costs. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Julia Bryant and her battle against the Halberg Empire. Writing this journey of resilience, strategy, and the high cost of victory has been an incredible experience. I would love to hear your thoughts on Julia's final decision. Did she make the right choice in sacrificing her privacy for the truth? Do you think Ethan was a traitor or just a pawn? Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into family drama and corporate revenge, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice served cold. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. Until next time, remember, the best revenge is not just winning, it's changing the game.